Thank you for joining Rancho Sahuarita Living page. Today we're going to introduce to you Gail Baumgardner-Brown, who is our featured community member, and she's going to talk to us about her dad's experience during World War II with the Flying Tigers. Thank you, Gail, for inviting us to your home and sharing your dad's experience.
Oh, thank you so much for the honor. For folks that are not familiar with who the Flying Tigers were, they started out as about 300 volunteers, American volunteers. They were called the AVG, American Volunteer Group. And they went over to help China fight the Japanese invasion before the United States was actually involved in the war. They had to go under false pretense, under different passports and whatnot, because if they went under the American flag, that would be a declaration of war, which they couldn't do. So there was a fellow named Claire Lee Chenault who organized this with Washington, and they sent over like 100 pilots and 200 support people. And the Japanese had been enjoying their victories without really much competition, because Chinese army was not well trained. They were flying World War I planes. They were really outnumbered. And well, all of a sudden these American pilots came in, and they were amazing. I think their kill ratio was something like 12-1. It was, so all of a sudden the table started to turn, and for the first time the Chinese people started to have hope. And the bond between the Chinese and the Americans at that point became almost instantaneous. They worked together. One of the things that my dad talked about was the Chinese people, the locals, were a big help to their units, because they would do the cooking, they would help to serve, they would help to get spare parts from downed planes to build new ones. So they worked really well together. And my dad joked about that he always had an interpreter, because he didn't speak Chinese and they didn't speak English. But of course, this very famous hand signals, over there, everything was okay. They knew what they had to do. My dad's primary functions was he was a flight engineer and the chief mechanic. And he worked on B-24s, B-25s, I forgot all of the other, but he wasn't sent over there as a fighter. He was with the bomber group, the 396th, the 12th. It was the 396th Air Service Squadron, the 12th Air Service Group. And they just went there and did what they had to do. I mean, they were very proud to serve, and it wasn't all about honor and being wonderful and being recognized. They were there to do a job. And they were called the greatest generation for a reason. They were just very humble, very loving of country, and there to help men. So one of the things that would happen is, after the Japanese realized how successful these pilots were, they really had to go after them, because otherwise they didn't have a chance. And they would come in to all the bases where the Flying Tigers were stationed, and as they were approaching, the guys from my dad's group and the other groups would have to destroy all the equipment, blow up the runways. My dad talked about two stories in particular. As I said, he was not trained in any of the artillery, but there was one night where there was a Japanese plane, and somebody had goofed and left the bomb bay door open, and there was a light shining from inside. So everybody took careful aim. My dad ended up on a 50 caliber machine gun, and they were trying to get this plane before the plane got them. And so that was his only experience, really, behind the guns. But what he did was the flight engineer basically sat in the seat behind the pilot. So he was the navigator. So he was involved in the dangerous flights. So his unit, the job that they were primarily assigned was to form the second echelon servicing aircraft in combat units in southwest China. And so he was over there from, I think, December of 43 through the end of the war, which was basically it ended in September of 45 officially. He left there in October. It took a couple months to sail back, and he came stateside again on Christmas Eve of 1945. But he formed a lot of very close relationships with the other fellows in his unit, and they used to have reunions every couple years that whoever lived in that city would host, and they stayed very connected. It was a very proud association for him, and especially after they got the notoriety that they did from what they were able to accomplish, they basically were responsible for saving China, saving the country. And what's really heartwarming is that the Chinese people have vowed to always honor and respect these men and women, because without them, China would have fallen. But my dad wasn't a big shot. He was just there to do whatever he was asked to do. One of his really proud moments is there was a fellow named Brigadier General Casey Vincent, and he was 29 years old when he became Brigadier General, the youngest in the history of our country since the Civil War. And my dad was assigned to his plane called the Silver Slipper. And there's a lot of interesting history on Vincent. He was in charge of the 68th Composite Wing, which covered the whole southwest part of China. And so my dad was honored to be his flight engineer and mechanic. One thing that he was awarded that he was very proud of was, this is a replica of Vincent's plane. This was a B-25 Mitchell. You can see it had his name on there. And there's a plaque on the bottom dedicating to my dad's work on this flight, on this plane. And this was something that was just so special to him, because it was a reminder of what he did, his connection. That was probably his closest of anything to fame, if you would.
Gail, we're very grateful for you having us into your house, for sharing this amazing story. You are our #1 feature member for Rancho Sahuarita.
Yeah.
So we made a little recognition and we want to hand it over to you. And this is just an appreciation for sharing this amazing story, because I think that our community needs more of these. And the more that we get to talk to our members and listen to the stories, especially what you just say, right, about the relationships with China, and there are things that we forget, right? Mm-hmm. But if we continue doing this, and for special members, I think that this community can be even greater and better. So we really thank you for this time.
Well, I thank you for the honor, being able to be your first one, and to be able to continue to have an opportunity to keep my dad's memory alive. He was, to me, one of the most incredible people I've ever known, and I thank you very much for this honor.
Of course, we're here for for our community, and we appreciate you. So thank you.
And so I can say to you, you ready for this? Okay. So I could say, 你好嘛，
你好，
很高兴见到你，我的朋友。
Okay.
Which basically is, hello, how are you? It's nice to know you, my friend.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
谢谢. Thank you.
谢谢。